Hello everybody, I wanted to come on here and explain a little bit about how I store and use my paints. Most of the time I pan my tube paints. That means I take the tube paint and I squeeze it out into these little pans, and then I label what it is on the side and I store them in these tins. And I do that for a couple of reasons. First of all, it wastes less paint than squeezing out a small dollop onto a plate like this, because later you have this dried little blob of paint after your project is done, and you have to figure out what to do with that. And you could take a palette knife and chip it out and try to figure out if you want to put it back into the right pan or whatever, or just leave it on the palette and then you've got all these little pallets building up. But I didn't want to have that, so it just ends up wasting a lot less paint. I don't have to worry about these little dried pieces of paint to deal with. It also gives me some flexibility in arranging my palette, because unlike this type of palette where the wells are permanent and the paint is squeezed directly into the spaces, I can rearrange these anytime that I want. And I can take them out and swap them around if I come up with a new color I want to put in, or a new palette for a different type of project. I can have a landscape set or a portrait set or whatever. Whereas with these, if I decide I want to put a different color in here, then I have to chip out every single one and rearrange them, or I'll just chip one out and put one at the end, and then they'll be out of order if that matters to you. And so this is just a lot more flexible. It also allows me to take out certain pans that I might want to use for a particular painting, and then I put them into a smaller tin, like this one, where I can keep all of the pans that I'm just using for that project, and then I can tote it around and bring it around the house with me if I'm just adding to that painting. So this can be for a particular project. Panning my tube paint also prevents this from happening. I have a tube here of lovely mineral violet paint by M. Graham, and what has happened to it, I haven't even used it very much, but the entire tube of paint, just from sitting there, has completely dried hard. I cannot squeeze any out. It is hard as a rock in here. It's totally like just hardened in the tube, and so I can't squeeze any out. So if I had panned it right away, then it wouldn't matter if it had dried, because it is dry and I can still get to it. This tube, I'm going to have to use some kind of snips and open up the tube from the bottom. You know, you can kind of unroll this little end here, but then you've got to try and cut open the metal tube, and this will be like a log of paint in here that I'm going to have to figure out how to chop it up or do something with it, because I can still use it as long as I can get it out of there. But panning the paint as soon as I get it means that I will always be able to get to the paint, and I will not worry about it drying out. Although I do have some half pans made up, I generally prefer to paint with full pans. It takes two half pans to make a full pan of paint, and I just prefer the half pan because the full pan, because I can get my brushes into there without damaging them so easily. There's just a lot more room for them to pick up the paint, whereas with these little ones I feel like I'm just kind of digging in there a little bit harder with my good brushes. Now, in order to actually preserve my bristles even more, what I've done is I have dedicated some cheap Crayola brushes for this purpose. And I love these brushes. They actually are really a great deal. They come in a set of 4, and I'm not sponsored by Crayola at all, but I just love this little set. It's their Crayola White Taklon Round Brush Set. It's made for kids, so it's very durable. I've noticed that the ferrule does not get wobbly too quickly. I've never had any of the bristles shed, and the paint on the handles has not seemed to chip off at all. I do take pretty good care of them like I would with my other brushes, but I can be kind of rough on them when I'm digging paint out. I don't worry at all about damaging these bristles. And I can keep this orange one just right here in my palette, and it's ready for helping me to get the paint out whenever I want. It comes with these 4 brushes, and I don't use this magenta one too much. It's pretty small. If you were using half pans of paint, this might be the one to use, but since I'm using full pans, that one I don't use very much. So the orange one I use for getting the paint out, and then these 2 larger ones I just use interchangeably, and what I use them for is when I've used paint and I've brought it down onto this palette, I can wash out my palette by getting right up into the corners. And again, I'm not worried about ruining these bristles because they're so cheap. I think it's about $5 for the 4 brushes. And I just can wash it all out. And then I can use my clean cotton rag or paper towel to dry out my surface. When I get ready to pan some paint, I use an empty half or an empty full pan. These pans, you can just get them on Amazon or an art supply store. And then I use a permanent marker and I write down the name of the pigment or the name of the paint color and the brand. So this one will be Daniel Smith Sap Green. And then on the side, you can see what the pigments are if you read them, the fine print here. This one is quinacridone gold, or PO48, mixed with nickel azo yellow, which is PY150, and phthalo green, PG7. So I like to write those on the other side because it just helps me when I'm mixing paint to know what I'm actually mixing together. So I'm going to just write PO48, PY150, and PG7. And now I have all the information that I need to keep on my pan. So I have the pigment information here, and then on the other side I've got the brand and the color that they're calling it. And then I take my paint and I put it in there, and to make sure that I'm not getting bubbles or empty spaces, I fill it up not entirely to the top, leaving a little space there for stirring. You can get several pans out of a tube here. And then I'm using some toothpicks just from the grocery store. These are just plain wooden toothpicks, and I'm pushing that paint into the corners so that it doesn't leave gaps. And I'm trying to flatten it out as best as I can. Some paints will flatten out best on their own. Other paints are thicker and you have to push them around a little bit. But what this does is it makes sure that there are no air bubbles in there, and it also makes sure that the paint goes right up into the corners so that when I want to get it out, I'm not going to have puddles of water pooling in those corners where the paint isn't. Once it's pretty flat, I can toss my toothpick and let that dry, usually for a day or two till it's completely hard. What some people do is, if they would like it to stay attached in their pan, in their metal tin, they will sometimes put a little magnet right on the back here. And so for that, what you can get are these self-adhesive magnet sheets. And this is just one that's already been cut up a little bit. You can just cut a piece that will fit onto the back of your pan. And then the backing can peel off like a sticker, like that. And then that is very sticky. And you can adhere it to the bottom of your pan. I'm not going to do that on this one because I will use that in my, I don't prefer to have my pans done that way. But this will make it actually magnetic. And then it will stick to the metal of your tin, and then it will not budge when you're trying to get paint out. I have several of these folding metal tins. I just get the inexpensive Medine ones from Amazon because there are some more expensive name brand ones, but these can tend to rust after a while, and so I don't want to have spent a ton of money on them if they're going to have to be tossed at some point. But I like having different sizes for different palettes. They do come with a mixing surface inside, and actually when they first come, there's another flap that opens out. So I'll show you on this one, this medium-sized one. Here are the main mixing trays. There's this second flap that opens up for more surface, although I don't use this for mixing because it sits kind of slanted on the table and everything seems to run down. But these are enameled, coated with an enamel-based paint, so they will not tend to bead up as much as plastic will. Also, the inside paint pan holder, where you can put your paint pans, it comes out completely. It's uncoated. This is the part that can rust, this silver part here. Eventually, especially right up under here, in fact, you might be able to see on some of these that there is already a little bit of rust forming on some of that there. And then if rust flakes off into your paint, that can cause problems. So what some people do is they actually remove this whole thing and just get rid of it, and then they put those magnets on the bottom of their paint pans and make them stick inside of this space. Although there are some bumps and ridges here, so it kind of limits how tightly you can fit paint pans in there. But this can be another mixing surface if you wanted to take the paint out and then use all three of these to mix with. What I have done just to save space on my desk is I've actually removed that second flap, and that is just done by pushing out the little pin that is in this area here, and then you can just remove that flap, and that way when I'm sitting at my desk I can just have it open like this so that I can put my paint here and I don't have to have that other flap in the way. There isn't a lot of mixing surface on these trays, however, so when I'm really in a painting project, I prefer to use ceramic mixing trays like this one, or for a big sky wash, I'll use an actual little dish where I can put a whole lot of paint and get a bigger brush into it. So if I'm doing a big area. These I got on Amazon as well, and any kind of white ceramic dish or plate will be fine. I just like the deep wells, and I like that there are a lot of different wells, and I like that the wells are different sizes, because sometimes you only need a little bit of paint for something, and you're not going to waste the space on a big well that way. As far as paint pan storage goes, I have a lot of paint pans because I do pan my paint so that it won't dry in the tube, and so that I always have access to create different palettes that I want to use for different projects. So this black one, as you've seen before, this is my main paint palette. It's the one that I use for mostly everything, and it has my most often used paint pans in it. So because I use this one all the time, I am able to monitor whether it's starting to rust or not. I also have a second one, and this is the one where I keep my Primatech collection of Daniel Smith paints, and those are made from genuine crushed up mineral pigments like amethyst and rhodonite and all of those wonderful earth pigments. So because those are different and they have different properties than some of the other paints, I like to keep them in a separate pan or tin by themselves. But otherwise, because these can rust, what I've decided to do for long-term storage of my paint pans is I found these little plastic clamshell boxes, and they came 6 in a pack, and because they're plastic, they will not ever rust. They have a nice lid which is attached so that the lid can't get lost, and they're see-through so that I can see what colors are in here just at a glance. So what I've done is I've organized them sort of in rainbow order so that I can find things easily. So I have reds and pinks in here. Then I have yellows and oranges. And of course there's some overlap. There is some red-orange, so I have to decide where to put that. Then I have greens and blues. Then I have purples and neutrals, so browns, grays, and blacks will go in there. And just by doing this, I can see at a glance where my paint pans are, and when I have one that's all finished drying, like this green sap green that we just made earlier, when it's all dry, I can put it into the green one, and I will always know that if I need sap green, I just come to there and look for it. This is the way that I store my tubes of paint. I just have this little tool organizer, which I got from Home Depot. You can get it at any kind of tool or home improvement store. And I like the ones where all of the drawers are the same size. But I tend to do these by rainbow order. So I have reds, oranges, 2 drawers full of yellows, 2 of greens, 2 of blues, and then purples, pinks, a couple of browns, and then black, gray, and white. So they just look like this inside, and I just keep, I don't even worry about brand, I don't worry about anything, I just kind of throw them in there if they match the color. And so that just helps me to find things better, and it is the same system that I use to organize my pans of paint, just by rainbow order. And then on these sides here I had other extra drawers, so I've put other pans that are not ones that I typically use a lot. They might be from brands that I'm not using right now. I have some pens, mostly Micron waterproof ink pens and white pigment pens. This drawer holds the tube keys that I can use to squeeze paint out of the tubes, and these little things that protect your brushes when they come from the store. I keep them, and then when I'm traveling around I can put those on. When I started painting, I used the Prima Watercolor Confections palettes, so I have 3 drawers of those, even though I'm not using them anymore, but they are just there. For one of my tutorials, I did actually use the Decadent Pies palette, and that was for the Forest Bookmarks tutorial. So that's that one. They're pretty nice little palettes, especially if you're just starting. Some swatches that I have done, staples and pins for my art boards, different erasers of different sizes and types, and then a drawer for some drawing tools, and an extra drawer that doesn't have anything in it right now. And up on top I store just some other things for watercolor and for painting. So that's how I organize my tubes of paint, if anybody was interested. Sometimes what I do, especially if I'm getting used to the layout of a new palette, is I will create this little palette key which goes with my setup here. And so I've just created this on my computer to have 2 rows of full pans that will match the 2 rows of full pans in my palette. So I put the name of the paint and the brand because I do sometimes have Winsor and Newton colors. Mostly I have Daniel Smith, but just in case I have a couple that are not, I will put the little code there for them. And then I laminate these. So I print it like this on my computer, and this paper that I use, I will insert a little picture of it. It's cardstock, but it's textured. I don't know if you can see this on the screen. I'm trying to tilt it in the light. It's textured a bit like watercolor paper. I would not use it for anything other than just swatching like this. But it goes through my printer really well. And then I just cut them apart. And once I have them cut apart kind of like this, I will go ahead and paint the swatches on, label them, laminate them so that they don't get, if they get wet, it won't hurt them. And then I put a magnet sheet on the back so that when I have my palette, I can stick that on there and I know which palette it is and what is inside. I will attach a PDF printable for you of that palette key, the one that you can swatch on if you'd like to. And if you have any questions, please let me know. I'm happy to answer any of them. And that's just a little glimpse into how I paint from pans.